Cigarette smoking is so terrible for you. Somewhere between die prematurely from smoking. There is just no other product like that on the market. There is a large group of people under the age of 18 who are trying nicotine for the first time through a vaping product. The way that they're positioned in shops, the bright colours,
flavours.
That's obviously concerning. But the question that we have, who are those people and would they have used nicotine in a cigarette? Every tobacco company has a big nicotine pouch brand. Currently there's no age of sale for nicotine pouches, so you can sell it to my 9-year-old.
Wow.
Tobacco companies are not in the business of public health. Tobacco companies are in the business of selling nicotine to as many people as will buy it from them.
How bad is vaping?
The combination of these chemicals was really
Our guest today is Hazel Cheeseman, Chief Executive of Action on Smoking and Health, and someone who has worked in the tobacco control industry for over a decade. Very exciting stuff. I'm interested to hear this podcast because we know smoking is bad, but now vaping is the new thing. So what's going on? Can you give us a bit of the backstory of what you've done in your career, your role, and how that fits into the current kind of smoking and vaping debate?
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me along. So Action on Smoking and Health, the charity that I run, has been around for more than 50 years. So we were set up by the Royal College of Physicians to campaign on the harms of smoking. Because in the 50s and 60s, the evidence was emerging that smoking was lethal, that it was causing lung cancer. And subsequently, the evidence grew on all these other health conditions that smoking causes. And the college wanted their government at the time to take action. They weren't taking action. So they established ASH to kind of drive forward that change. And so that's basically what we've been doing for the last 50 years, looking at the different ways in which we can reduce smoking in this country. And we now have some of the lowest rates of smoking in Europe. We've really one of the world leaders, I would say, in this space.
It always amazes me whenever I go back to Europe how many people still smoke. I'm like, what's going on?
Yeah, and
we
used to be the dirty ashtray of Europe. So, we've done an amazing job in this country of bringing smoking rates down. And as you say, we now have these other nicotine products on the market that you probably couldn't have even dreamt of when ASH was established. How they fit into the conversation about smoking is something that ASH has spent a lot of time working on and thinking about over the last more than 10 years now. I mean, e-cigarettes arrived on the UK market probably in around 2007. They looked a lot like cigarettes at the time. They had these sort of cigarette products, you might remember them. They sort of had sort of fake filters at the top of them to make, made out of plastic but made to look like a cigarette. And they were kind of marketed as something that you could use because the smoking ban had come in pubs and clubs, in all public spaces. And so it was like, you can use these in places where you can't smoke. And they sort of were okay, but they weren't very good alternatives, I would say, for people who wanted to use something instead of smoking because of their addiction to nicotine. But over time, they became much better at delivering nicotine and much more popular. And they were, to excuse the pun, kind of a slow burn. They took off really behind the scenes with smokers saying to each other, I've been using this thing. It seems to be good at helping me not smoke. And people would try them. And then as they gained in popularity, the kind of commercial forces, I suppose, come into play. There's a market there. The tobacco industry started to get into the game, started to produce these products, other players. And we've seen an absolute explosion in the types of products on the market, the businesses that are involved in that industry, and the flavours, the marketing. You will have just experienced it. Of being in the world, you would have seen the explosion of this market.
Well, you see it on basically every high street in the country. There's guaranteed to be a little vape shop somewhere on your high street. But what's the data saying? Because I don't know, I'm 37 now, so I don't hang out with 18-year-olds. But what's the actual data saying of how many people are vaping now in the UK?
So it's more or less more or less the same proportion of people are vaping as are smoking. So around about 10%, maybe a little bit more. And it does vary a bit by age. So it is more common among younger people, younger adults, and less common in the sort of 60 plus category. Although the use of vaping products has grown in every age group over the last decade, and quite exponentially in pretty much all of those age groups. But it continues to be something that was adopted earliest, I guess, by young adults, as lots of kind of new technologies are, like new products on the market tend to be adopted by people in their 20s because of just the way they are in the world.
Yeah.
And then you see them, being taken up by other age groups. And concerningly, I mean, there are, I think, as I've sort of implied, there are sort of perhaps benefits to some of the way that vaping products are being used by some people, particularly smokers. But there's obviously a concern about people under the age of 18, people that have never smoked using these products. And we've certainly seen an increase in that, perhaps over the last sort of 4 or 5 years.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but about 10% of the UK smoke normal cigarettes.
Yeah.
10% roughly now vaping as well. So you've got 20% of the population.
No, there's a big overlap in those
there's
groups.
A big overlap.
So, the majority of people that are using these products are using them either to reduce the amount they smoke or to quit. But let's say it's sort of in the region of 15%.
About 15.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. But then that gets to the point of why they were designed, right? As a tool to essentially transition from smoking into something that gave you a similar experience but was better for your health.
Yeah.
Now, if they're used in that regard, transitioning away from smoking into vaping and then potentially not at all, do you think they're healthy?
They are definitely healthier than smoking. I would be very unwilling to say that vaping products were healthy because anything that you're inhaling, your lungs are a very vulnerable organ. Anything that you're inhaling into your lungs that you need not be inhaling in is probably going to carry some risk.
Yeah.
But cigarette smoking is so terrible for you. Somewhere between half and two in three people that smoke will die prematurely from smoking. There is just no other product like that on the market. They're heavily addictive. It really doesn't take that many cigarettes to addict somebody, and the consequences of that are like a lifetime of addiction and often premature death. So compared to that very high bar of how terrible cigarette smoking is for you, vaping is much less harmful.
Okay.
It is the evidence that it is able to help people stop smoking is growing and quite good. And quantifying exactly how much less harmful they are than cigarette smoking is difficult because people haven't used them for the decades that we've seen cigarette smoking. Yeah. But by any measure, they're just so many magnitudes less harmful than smoking that if you're a smoker and you're switching, healthier for sure.
It's a step in the right direction,
yes.
Right? And I think that is an important thing. If you're eating, bags and bags of crisps every day, and then you keep eating bags and bags of crisps, but switch to baked crisps, you're going to get less fried fat, and that's going to be healthier for you. But is it healthier to actually have the bag crisps? Well, probably not, right? You're better off without them, ultimately. So I think that's a similar point. But what you're saying, I guess, then is that the risk here is if vaping is becoming so attractive and fun and engaging for a younger audience, it's bringing new smokers into the game that wouldn't have otherwise been smokers.
Yeah, absolutely. So we sort of talk about naive nicotine users. The common thing, I guess, in these products is that they contain nicotine. And nicotine is not kind of inherently at the quantities that obviously you can use it as, it is a poison, like you can use it as an insecticide at high concentrations.
But it's a plant, no?
It is a plant. The nicotine comes from the tobacco plant.
Yeah.
At very high concentrations, nicotine is a poison. But at the levels of concentration that you find even in a cigarette, it's addictive, but it's not the thing that's killing people. Yeah. But it is the thing that keeps people smoking.
Yes.
It is the thing that people are getting that is giving them a pleasurable experience from a vape or from these other new products on the market that we now have, things like nicotine pouches.
Yeah.
So the nicotine is important because it's addictive.
It's the addictive part, but not necessarily the bad part.
Well, it depends if you think addiction is bad.
It's bad, yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, for some people, for lots of people that are are, dependent on nicotine in some form or another, it's just a negative experience. Like, people don't enjoy the sense of being dependent on something.
Yeah.
And additionally, if you're a cigarette smoker, it's also killing you.
Yes.
So I think it's hard to see the nicotine as completely neutral, but the concern, I think, is that we have really had insufficient controls on the way that these products are marketed and positioned. So the value of them as a way of helping people stop smoking, which I think is indisputable, is in danger of being kind of drowned out by the way that they're positioned in shops, the bright colours, all the marketing,
flavours,
all the marketing that kind of comes around that, and the sense that the public have that this is something that people are taking up and becoming addicted to nicotine for the first time through vaping products. So we can unpack that a bit more about whether that's true, whether people are, people who otherwise wouldn't smoke are.
Do you have data on that?
There is a large group of people under the age of 18 who are trying nicotine for the first time through a vaping product. That's obviously concerning. But the question that we have when we look at this as kind of public health professionals is, well, who are those people? And would they have used nicotine in a cigarette for the first time if they hadn't tried it through a vaping product? The data is growing all the time, and our understanding of that is growing all the time. At the moment, we don't see a growth in the number of people who are smoking underage. It's kind of static at the moment. It needs to. Some of the laws that the government is looking to introduce at the moment will hopefully address that. But we probably have seen a bit of a growth in the last couple of years in the overall level of nicotine use in under 18s. So that does indicate that some of those kids would probably not have used nicotine at all if it wasn't for the way that the vapes were being marketed.
Well, and it speaks to logic, right? And I don't think I've ever really told anyone this publicly, but, when I was 14, I think we went on a school trip to Disneyland Paris, and obviously they just didn't care about age restrictions on smoking or whatever. So we thought it was cool to go pick up some cigarettes from the petrol station, and then we had nothing to do. It was 10 o'clock at night in Disneyland Paris. The park was closed. So we all got cigarettes and smoked for the first time. And it was disgusting. It was tasted foul, but we did it because we thought it was exciting, not allowed, and cool and whatever. And then felt absolutely horrendous the next day and had to get the bus back to England. And it was the worst bus ride of my life. But that experience very much was well, that's disgusting. Why would I do it? Now, if the experience was, oh my God, this tastes like strawberry laces, and then it doesn't give you the same kind of feeling the next day because perhaps it's not quite as bad, then you might uptake smoking, right? Because you're actually, that's not so bad. This is quite cool.
Well, it's a really a telling story. It tells you something about teenagers and something about the way that addiction can work. So the purpose of teenagers in as you grow up is teenagers are experimental. They're supposed to push boundaries. They're supposed to kind of break away from being children and become adults. And we see this in all sorts of things, that teenagers do all sorts of dumb things because they are teenagers. They put themselves in danger and at risk. And one of the things that they do is to try things like smoking and like vaping. And for lots of those young people, trying cigarettes for the first time, so the evidence would suggest that around half of those kids who tried those cigarettes with you in Disneyland Paris would probably have gone on to regularly smoke, and about half wouldn't.
Really?
Which is pretty high, though.
That's
50%.
quite high. I didn't think it'd be that high. Yeah.
So for you, it didn't. Maybe it didn't trigger the dopamine responses in the brain that it might have done for somebody else. People respond differently to nicotine depending on their own body chemistry. We don't quite know yet, again, because the data is still growing. What's that transition from vaping? If you try a vape, is it the same sort of likelihood that you will go on to regularly vape? It doesn't look like that's quite true at the moment, because trial is quite a bit higher than continued
adoption.
Use. But honestly, as these products become better at delivering nicotine, which if we go back to the they were originally created to kind of help people stop smoking. You want them to deliver nicotine quite well because that makes them better alternatives to smoking.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if they're better at delivering nicotine, they could also be better at
making you addicted.
The smokers are already addicted, so we kind of don't worry so much about them. So I think it is really important that we think about how, the argument from industry, the industry, the different bits of the industry that make and sell these products, is that they shouldn't be so heavily regulated because they are not as harmful as cigarettes. And I, to some extent, agree that they shouldn't be regulated in the same way as cigarettes. But that's not to say they shouldn't be regulated, because they are an addictive product. We can see from the way that they, the uptake has happened in young people, that they can appeal to young people, that they can be used by, be appealing to people that have never smoked before. Yeah. And so we've got to get the balance better in how they're regulated so that we don't lose the opportunity to help the sort of 6 million people that are still smoking, whilst protecting, people who are growing kids up from being flogged these products.
So how old do you have to be to buy a vape today?
18.
But
indeed.
Yeah, okay. Because you see it, kids on the corner at the school hanging out, they'll get their hands on it some way, won't they? For parents or, family members that have a teenager that's vaping, ignoring the kind of potentially it's better if they, it's a good transition from smoking. Is it really bad for our health? It's order of magnitude better than smoking, but do we know how bad it really is?
I mean, it is a tricky question to answer. We don't expect them to be without risk because, as I say, there aren't a gazillion chemicals.
How bad is vaping?
I just can't remember the number off the top of my head. There aren't as many of the very harmful chemicals that we see in tobacco smoke in the vapor that you inhale. But there's not nothing in them. It's unlikely that the nicotine is beyond addicting you is doing you that much harm. But there are other ingredients in those products that could potentially have a harm.
Well, because when you burn stuff, it's typically not that good. And like you say, our lungs are weak and sensitive. And there was the cases in the beginning of wasn't it the vitamin E oil that was in them that everyone thought was helpful, and then actually burning vitamin E oil was toxic and
So the one thing that vapes are not doing is they're not burning anything. So they are heating it into an aerosol, I think would be technically the scientific thing. When you combust something, when you set fire to it and inhale it, pretty much whatever's in it is bad for you.
Yeah.
So you don't have that in these vaping products. But the UK market is not unregulated. So we do, you can't put vitamins in legal UK products. There are other ingredients that have been cause for concern and are prohibited from UK products. But if you are accessing products that don't comply with UK regulations or accessing them in other countries, then they could have some of these chemicals which are concerning. And obviously, if you're underage and you're accessing these products, there is a bigger risk that they are not legal, because unscrupulous people who are prepared to sell to people under 18 are also much more likely to be selling products that are not
you pick them
legal.
up online, or when you're in a holiday in a different country.
Exactly. And there was a particular concern with vitamin E acetate. So in America, they had a whole load of vapes that had THC in them, the sort of active ingredients of cannabis, and they were cut for reasons I don't really understand with this vitamin E acetate, and something to do with the combination of these chemicals was really, really damaging and caused these really acute lung injuries in America. So obviously we don't have the THC. I mean, you can obviously buy them illegally with THC in them. We don't have the vitamin E acetate. And so the legal products in the UK, they don't put you at that kind of acute risk. But is there a chronic risk from using these products? For most people don't have an acute reaction to cigarette smoking. Some people do. But like most people, the harm from cigarette smoking takes a couple of decades to accumulate. And then you have the cardiovascular risk, the cancer risk, the respiratory risk. If we take those in turn, so cancer risk from vaping products, at the moment we really just don't have any reliable evidence which would suggest that vaping would increase your risk of cancer. They've done various studies where they, look at people's urine and look for biomarkers in the urine, that we would expect to be like indications that you might have elevated risk of cancer, and we don't see that. A cardiovascular risk, so that would be more, I think the jury is more out there. If you think about the, nicotine might have a kind of similar response on the body as caffeine in terms of like, the cardiovascular impact, and we all know what that feels like. What most people have had a lot of coffee and felt their heart rate go. So it's plausible maybe that there could be some elevated cardiovascular risk, but it's not proven. And certainly again, if we go back to people who are using them as an alternative to smoking, the evidence that when people stop smoking and switch to people with existing cardiovascular conditions, heart conditions, stroke, whatever it might be, when they switch to vaping products, that the kind of markers of harm around the cardiovascular goes down. So it definitely, but we already kind of know they're better than cigarette smoking. Respiratory risk, and that is probably where the long-term risk, if it is there from vaping products, is likely to emerge. Because as I say, that the lung is a very vulnerable organ. We know that being exposed to pollutants in our environment is bad for our lungs. Exactly. So inhaling something into your lungs is probably going to have some long-term respiratory risk, but we can't quantify it.
Well, even having an open fire in your house, burning wood, is not meant to be good for your lungs.
I mean, probably that's riskier, I would say, because you've got those small particulates that the reason why smoking is banned in public places is because of those small particulates that are produced when you set fire to things. And if you have them in enclosed spaces, that's obviously really, really bad for health. So open fires are not good for your lungs.
But I get it, right? This is some of the problems in health and nutrition science around ultra processed foods is very difficult. And it takes maybe 50 years to pinpoint that thing causing that thing, right? Yet we're seeing cancer rates rise in younger kids especially. But to tell people what it exactly is almost an impossible job, which is hard. Because if vaping's only been around for 10, 15 years, then how do you prove it?
Yeah, and in a way, it is like a... There are obviously precautionary things you can do. You can say there seems to be very little downside, I think, from ensuring that the fewest number of under 18-year-olds start vaping. Most of them are not smoking. Most of them won't be able to even legally buy cigarettes in the future as the law changes. We should put regulations in place that reduce the appeal of these products, particularly to this age group. 100%. I feel like there's very little downside there, regardless of how much it turns out vaping, is or isn't bad for you. The thing where we've got to be more cautious in how we regulate and how we communicate to the public, because most people do now, more than half of people from the survey work that we do, and smokers, not just the general public, think that vaping is as bad or worse for you as smoking, which isn't true.
Right.
And perhaps will then inhibit those people from using them as a way of stopping smoking. So as we regulate and as we communicate about these products, we do have to get the balance right, because there is a risk that you go all the way down that precautionary road and you put loads and loads of heavy restrictions on them, and you put all these scaremongering health messages out there, and maybe you completely stop any under 18-year-old from ever using these products. But then the flip side of that is that you also then inhibit or prevent smokers from switching. And we absolutely know what the health harms are from smoking. We can more or less quantify what the benefits are of switching to vaping, and so we can kind of see what the problem would be if you absolutely stop people from switching.
But so it's quite interesting. The public perception is already that vaping's just as bad as smoking and you shouldn't do it, even if that's not true. But that's the perception. would you say then the latest trend of like nicotine pouches is just the next step along that journey for tobacco companies to say, okay, well, if we can't do vaping, then we'll just go in pouches and we'll sell you nicotine that way and we're going to make our money that way?
I mean, tobacco companies are not in the business of public health. Tobacco companies are in the business of selling nicotine to as many people as will buy it from them.
Yeah.
And they were really late entrants into the vaping market. As I said, like it was something that came out of China. There were, smaller companies around the world who were like selling these products. It took a while for tobacco companies to kind of get in on the game with vaping products. They had taken off. They came out of China, smaller companies picked them up, and it took a while for the tobacco industry to see them as something that was like a disruptor for their market that they needed to get on board with. Yeah. So they have learned the lesson. So they are not doing that with nicotine pouches. And every tobacco company has a big nicotine pouch brand. While there are restrictions on the way that vapes can be marketed, albeit that I think they're insufficient, there aren't really those restrictions on nicotine pouches currently, and you'll have seen advertising on the tube, on the
everywhere.
On billboards, bus stops, and also there's no age of sale for nicotine pouches.
So you could buy it
sell
as
it to
a
my
10-year-old.
9-year-old.
Really?
No offense. Yeah.
Wow. Because nicotine itself isn't regulated; it's the smoking.
Yeah. So at the moment we regulate medicinal nicotine. So if it's a medicine, it's regulated. If it's in a cigarette, it's regulated. If it's in a vaping product, it's regulated. If it's in any kind of tobacco product, it's regulated. But not just general. Novel nicotine products are not. They will be when the government passes a bill currently before Parliament. But as we speak, they aren't.
Is that coming soon?
Yeah, so they're most of the way through. The government says it will be passed by the spring, and then we will at least have an age of sale for nicotine pouches.
Which will be?
18.
18 as well. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and they'll bring in these other restrictions around marketing and stuff. But the tobacco industry can see this bill coming. Like, they know it's before Parliament. They know it will pass. Yeah. The amount of money that must be going in to getting a jump on this legislation, they're in your face at point of sale. They are, as I say, you see them everywhere. Because I spend a lot of time on my computer looking at things about smoking, I get on social media, I get nicotine pouch adverts all day long.
So essentially, they know the ban's coming for under 18, so that they're pumping the money in now to get as many people on it as possible.
And the restrictions on marketing as well. They are attempting to be ahead of the game on this one. But it's a different, whether nicotine pouches have a role, again, as an alternative to smoking, probably. You're not inhaling anything, you're absorbing the nicotine, which, as I've already said, it's addictive, but it's not necessarily lethal. You get them in all these crazy, really high strengths, which is probably, A, not a very nice consumer experience, and B, probably does have some risk. Yeah. Again, if you're using them to not smoke, it's probably better for you.
It could be a step on from vaping, in a way, a healthier step on.
Yeah, I mean, again, these things are all novel, but from first principles, you don't inhale anything. They are probably going to be less harmful than vaping. They're less kind of in your face than vaping. One of the things that you get a kind of confirmation bias, don't you? You're worried about how many people are vaping, and then everywhere you go, all you do is see people that are vaping, and then reinforces your idea that lots and lots of people are vaping. I mean, lots of people are vaping.
Yeah. But you don't visually see the pouch.
Yeah, and the same, and in terms of young people's behaviours, we know that young people who believe that their peers are using these products are more likely to go and try these products. That's just basic psychology, isn't it? If you think everybody else around you is doing something, of course, you want to try it too. Yeah. Whereas again, the pouches are just a less visible product. So I think there's lots of virtues probably in that nicotine pouch space. But honestly, the tobacco industry is all over it.
They're just gunning for it already.
Yeah, so I would say they are not the friends of public health. It might be that they happen to sell something that could help mitigate the terrible, terrible harms that are caused by their current big cash cow products, which has been which has made them billions and billions for 100 years.
Well, it's an interesting thing because, again, I tried a nicotine pouch because I was curious, and I saw a lot of people talking about the level of focus it can give you and how it's really good. And I was writing a book last year, so I was like, well, maybe this can help me focus and lock in to just write 5,000 words in 3 hours.
You try anything at that point?
Well, yeah, I needed some help. But, I tried it and I literally did it, I think, twice and felt terrible.
Yeah.
Both times. And that's the danger, I guess, where you're giving it to like a 14, 15-year-old kid. It's like, it was so much stronger than, on orders of magnitude, than a cup of coffee.
Oh, yeah.
That I felt weird.
Yeah.
For like a couple of hours after. And I did it twice just to think, oh, maybe it was just the first time. Tried to, and I just never touched it again.
We do need a bit more research in like how to support people to use them as an alternative to smoking. But honestly, I think the idea that they are going to be the thing that you need to focus to just get through that last 5,000 words, I mean, I don't think there's great evidence for that. And if you don't use nicotine all the time, some of these pouches are crazy strong.
Yeah.
When you inhale a cigarette, the nicotine is in your brain in like, a matter of seconds, under 10 seconds, it's in your brain. It's really fast. So if you inhale too much, if you get too much nicotine in your body, really soon, you get a head rush, you don't feel great, you stop, and then your body kind of
self-regulates.
It kind of calms down and you feel all right relatively quickly. With the nicotine pouches, at the point that you start to feel the nicotine, because you absorb it more slowly, like through what they call the buccal cavity in your mouth, by the time you start to feel it and you take it out, your body's still going to be absorbing like a load more nicotine. So you terrible. You get too much nicotine and it makes you feel rubbish. And so that what you do, the human body's response to too much nicotine at an acute level is to vomit. So you get these stories about people passing out, throwing up. That's what the body does to get rid of I've got too much nicotine in my body. They could be useful to help people as an alternative to smoking, but we've got to have some good advice to people on how to use them, because otherwise they just feel a terrible experience.
Good guardrails, and we have to understand it, right? Because on one hand, I would never ever smoke, but I have heard that the nicotine itself, other than addictive element, is like not actually that harmful in itself. So I was like, well, let me try it. Let's see if it works. I'm not opposed to trying new things, but when it made me feel that way, I was just like, this isn't right. I think
this idea, there is quite a big thing out there that nicotine can help you focus and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think the science is,
dubious.
It's dubious. I mean, it's not completely complete nonsense, but I think it's quite difficult to disaggregate from what is just withdrawal from nicotine and what is like maybe providing some sort of neurological benefit of some kind. Because the experience of withdrawing from nicotine is really unpleasant, and you're not focused, and you can't, and and then you have the nicotine and you feel better and you can focus.
Right.
Like anybody who's a smoker would have had that experience where they're like, oh, I don't feel like, have a cigarette, focus, I can do it. Well, yeah, of course, you withdrew from nicotine and then you got some nicotine and then you could focus. So I would be really unsure about the idea that, using nicotine in a pouch or any other kind of way is going to like suddenly magically help you write a book. I think it's likely to addict you, and then you need the nicotine in order to focus, because otherwise you're like experiencing unpleasant withdrawal symptoms.
And that's definitely an issue, addiction to anything. You don't want anything that's really addictive. But what's your biggest gripe then with the tobacco industry and what's going on at the moment? What would you want to change?
How long have you got? My biggest gripe with the tobacco industry, I mean, my biggest gripe with the tobacco industry is probably less about what they are doing in the UK and more about what they are doing around the world. So, the tobacco industry is a big global industry dominated by a small number of big companies. And they come in here in the UK market, they talk about, we've got these reduced risk products, we're part of a smoke-free future, la 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 la. Whilst also arguing against lots of regulation that would be highly effective and regulation of the cigarette market, which continues to be very, very profitable for them, despite, the fact that we've got declining rates of smoking in the UK. And then they are off in Zambia and in Pakistan and in Indonesia and Kenya and wherever, these emerging, well, some of them are not so emerging, these, markets where there are poorer regulations, where governments have less capacity to regulate the industry, and they are advertising their lethal cigarettes in ways that they would absolutely not be allowed to do here. They've been fighting against regulation in Zambia for more than a decade. Basic advertising restrictions that we have had in place for 20 years, more than 20 years.
So no matter what they say from like a nice corporate responsibility line of we want to smoke for a future, actually their actions are doing the complete opposite in other territories where they can get away with
Yeah,
it.
exactly. They are corporate interests who are always going to act in a way that's going to maximise their profits.
Yeah.
And in the UK, the cigarette market is in decline. It does still make them 900 million a year in the UK, so it's not like
Small.
It's not like small change, but obviously the writing's on the wall. So, like, what are the other products that we can be selling? What can we be making a profit from? And also, the UK sets a standard, right? So the UK regulates in a certain way. It kind of gives other countries the ability and the kind of confidence
to go and copy that regulation.
So the UK matters from that in that way to the tobacco industry. But financially, you know, those markets in Africa, those markets in Asia, I mean, smoking rates across the African continent are much lower than they are in Europe, because basically the tobacco industry wasn't marketing in Africa, wasn't selling cigarettes for 50 years because people didn't have the incomes to buy them.
Yeah.
So the market was not relevant to them, even though they were growing lots of tobacco there. But that's become less true. You know, lots of African countries are, you know, more affluent, developing. They are really exciting markets for the tobacco industry, which is obviously really bad news for the people in those countries.
That's really sad to hear. But taking it back to the UK in terms of just people's health in general, what's the one thing you would want them to understand about reducing harm, be it smoking, vaping, pouches?
The most harmful thing you can do is carry on smoking. It is hard to stop. People who have become addicted will know, you know, most people want to stop. They'll try lots of times and they'll find themselves back to smoking again. So, you know, keep trying to not do the thing that is, you know, almost certainly going to shorten your life or make your life much harder as you get older. You know, if you cannot abstain completely from nicotine, these other alternatives, particularly these non-tobacco alternatives, vaping, nicotine pouches, they are a good option for if you cannot abstain from nicotine altogether. But if you don't need to put nicotine in your body, just don't. It's not a very fun drug.
Yeah.
Like, there are other things to do with your time and other things to do with your money.
One, it's expensive and it wastes a lot of people's money and it's not good for their health and it's definitely not cool. I would never advocate for it.
No, I don't think so.
Like you say, your lungs are sensitive. They're a huge part of your body. And if you play any kind of sport, you know how important your lungs are to that equation. And smoking anything, whether it be your smoke fire in your house, is not a good idea. So let's not smoke, people. It's terrible. Thank you so much for joining us, Hazel. That was a real quick whistle-stop tour, but I had no idea about what they were doing in Africa. So that was really interesting and just shows the ethics of some of these big companies. But hopefully the podcast and social media can expose some of the light on what they're actually doing and hopefully get these companies to change their ways and hopefully make us all healthier.
I mean, I think it's optimistic to think that the companies will change their ways. It's governments that have to act. You know, there's way too much money to be made. Governments have got to act to make sure that these industries can't behave in the way that they do.
One, thank you for doing what you do and trying to push the industry to the government to regulate the industry better. And I mean, because one thing's for sure, we should definitely not be giving any of this stuff to school kids. I mean, that's just ridiculous that they find these loopholes and then sell pouches to 12-year-olds is absolutely horrendous. But we like to end the podcast on one final question. What does health mean to you, Hazel?
Oh my goodness, what does health mean to me? It means just being able to enjoy the things that you like to enjoy without being inhibited, without having to think. Health is not having to think about your health. I mean, just to bring it back to the cigarette smoking, the thing that really breaks your heart when you talk to people who've had a lifetime of smoking cigarettes is that they're reaching their retirement age or just before their retirement age generally, and the basic things that they just enjoy in life, like playing football or, you know, going out with their friends, have become difficult because they've got COPD, because they're like dealing with cancer, because they've got a cardiovascular condition.
Yeah.
And what a gift it is to not have to think about your health.
Yeah.
And the best, you know, from a tobacco control point of view, the best way that you can get to later life and not thinking about your health is not to have a cigarette.
Amazing. I mean, it shortens everyone's life, so that's quite proven. And so, yeah, you just want to live your life for as long as you can, as healthy as you can, so you can enjoy it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.